An island is created by the sea and is its own special kingdom. Its very substance is the work of waves, crashing surf, and gentle ripples. There is no shell nor pile of sand that is not water-borne. It is a land that belongs to the ocean. Captiva has embraced new visitors, human pioneers, with expectations of taming this restless wilderness. What reasons must they have to call Captiva home?
When we come to Captiva, we're all on common and safe ground. My mom was really big on making sure that family is first and foremost. Always remember that you love family. Blood is what ties together, and Captiva is the place where we come. This is kind of the glue that holds our family together. Like here's one, Maggie. This is my goddaughter. My youngest daughter, my son, and here's Hillary is one of my older sisters. 12, 13, 14, yeah, they're all here. We now maintain a website, and each house has its own calendar. My grandfather moved here because he had 2 heart attacks up in Illinois, and his doctor had said, it's too cold for you here. The climate's not good for you. You need to move south where it's warmer. So they moved to here in 1938. But when he died, that left my grandmother with a property and no means of support. First thing she did was to sell this piece of property right here, which was, I believe, to the Loomises. So this was the house that my dad built when he moved down here, when he retired, 1980. And that was where they ended up retiring at. And my grandfather, these bricks, or cinder blocks, he made these on the beach. Where the bricks stop, it's like a concrete floor there. Used beach sand and the Portland. He made all the bricks for the 3 houses that he built here. My grandmother was a real avid citrus grower, and that tree next to the carport is an avocado. This here is a mulberry. I don't know if you've ever had mulberries, but ripe mulberries, they're like this long and this big around. They are delicious. Everybody in my family are avid fishermen. So when people come in and Twin Waters anchorage is full, a lot of times there'll be 6 or 8 boats anchored out here. This is a great place to come down and have coffee and watch the sunrise. There was a shack. It's more like a tent that was here that was blue, and my grandmother called it the Robin's Nest. So he tore it down and built this as a guest house for everybody. These are all hand-drawn by Ding Darling. This is my grandfather, and that's like a caricature of him, but he wrote this, thanks a million, from the gang. Here's a party at Twin Waters, February 9th, 5 p.m. But, what year? It's a birthday party for Boots White. Here's one that's a date, 1952. That's my mom and dad. That's before they were married. That's in Blind Pass. There's Dad. Here's what the house looked like in the late 40s. My grandfather built that pool by hand. It was me with my 3 kids. This is what the road looked like before Hurricane Charlie.
It looks like the tray is ready to be taken off. I'm going to move it right around on this side. There's some tasty sweet smoked mullet. Oh, these are beauties. There's a piece to eat.
I know there's no
practical or logical reason that I could give for preserving history, but my reason for preserving it is emotional and personal. This is the engagement photo of my mother and my father. This is my grandmother, a photo of her from, gosh, I believe it was the early 20s. And it's my grandmother's original recipe for ice cream. It's lovely to see it in her handwriting from 1931. My daughter Amber's recipe for gazpacho that she wrote in 2nd grade. I have to tell you, as beautiful as Timmy's Nook was, with all the history and characters that went on in that, there was nothing like watching the moon rise over that water. There's still beauty in it, isn't there? So can I tell you about when I was a kid? I think my family's history is a little bit unique, and it doesn't have anything to do with Captiva history, but when I was 4 years old, my parents packed up everything I had. They sold everything we had and packed up what was left. We lived in Spain, we lived in Italy, France. We moved to Okinawa, moved back to England. They decided to ship everything. And there was a big warehouse fire in the shipping building. Everything was lost except for the suitcases that we had packed when we got on the plane. Put some of the wet wood on top. Get that flame to die down and give it some more of the buttonwood. And I have to say that's probably why I really enjoy other people's found things right now, and why I really value the few things that I have still of my family. I do know the value of preserving history. I love the idea of palatable things in history, things that you can touch, because I come from a great family of storytellers. So this is the history I was talking about in the smokehouse. Look, just layer upon layer. And when we're not actively cooking in it, you just open the door and you can smell the history of Uncle Joe and the smoke behind it. It's beautiful. Call me crazy, I really enjoy this as one of the layers of Captiva history. Wow. I think if you have my mother's cookbook with her handwritten recipes, I think if you have Uncle Joe's smokehouse, I think it validates the stories that you've heard, and it leads you to ask those questions that you wouldn't know to ask otherwise. Everybody's got a reason why they find their truth now, right? Who knew that would be my reason?
It was supposed to be just for a year. I was working for a paralyzed gentleman who'd been in the diplomatic service. That was in 1959. I was 19, and well, it turned out to be 20 years to the day. Changed a lot, obviously, over the years. Things have been built and enlarged, but I'm always happy here. And when I come across the causeway, I just have a feeling of detachment that I'm leaving the world as it exists on the other side. When I first came, of course, there was no causeway, and so you had a half hour of riding across on the ferry, and you really had a feeling of being remote. When I got here, there was electricity, but it was very sketchy. There was no piped over water. Everybody had cisterns, and then deep wells, which was very sulfurous. Mr. Harrison, being in a wheelchair, backed over my foot, and there was no doctor on the island. Dr. Baker on Sanibel, he was called Jungle Baker. He, with a pair of clippers, just chomped off the edge of it, ripped it out, and then painted me with silver nitrate. If you needed a tooth pulled, you planned ahead. People who were drawn to Captiva were generally characters, one way or another, and they made the island what it was and is. Social life here was around the beach. You would meet out on the beach fishing, or the post office was sort of the center of the universe. You just got together, people played charades. They just enjoyed each other's company. Ladies would wear elegant Paris perfumes, but everybody smelled the same because you had mosquito repellent under it all. This road used to go all the way up the beach when I was first here. and then was beachfront up into South Seas. Where the boats are would be about where Andy's dock was. And then this side, you can't quite see around the corner, would be Timmy's and where the old post office was. They were told to stay the channel here, but they would get out about that far and it looked like the whole world was there. They would rev it up and onto the sandbar and then just keep trying to plow across. It was really simple and unspoiled. As old timers do, you start saying, well, it didn't used to be that way, or it was this or that. However, for people who are now coming across the causeway that didn't know it before, it's still a paradise. It really is.
My father built this house, but I came to Captiva before my mother and father, and that was in 1939. And Alice O'Brien, captain, would bring down her 67-foot yacht every year called the Wanigan. And back in the late 30s, early 40s, that was the only communications on the island, was that ship-to-shore radio that they had. My mother just fell in love with the island. The fact that it was rustic, it was laid back, it was quiet. We would leave here at 7. She would drop me off at the lighthouse, and I would walk from the lighthouse back to the Mucky Duck, having to, in those days, swim across Blind Pass. Captiva Bridge in those days was a wooden pile bridge. The southern tip of Captiva went a good half-mile past where the bridge is, sort of around the corner. The whole length of Sanibel, there were mounds of shells. It was about a 3-foot high. The shells would come in every night.
You know, there was one little teeny store as you came off the landing onto Sanibel, had a gas station, and we stayed in that first bedroom over there. And I remember thinking, this is absolutely the most wonderful view I've ever seen in my life, and the most impossible small house to ever live in. This is a family collection, and a rather good one. Unfortunately, they kind of rambled around a little bit, but Janonias, lion's paws, white angel wings, paper fig, ton shell. This is Bill McKenzie and Marion McKenzie getting ready to take the ferry over to Sanibel Captiva. And around the 1950s, I would imagine. But look how dressed up they are. And this is the house that they built they poured the concrete and made blocks right here on the property.
Andy's dock was a place that you never forgot, because Andy and Dessa Rossi were real characters, and they remember very, very well. That was where you got, the locals got their beer and hamburgers at either there or down at Timmy's Nook.
And here is a not very great picture, but it's Andy's dock, taken in the 60s. And here's Andy and Dessa. And here is a better image of Andy and Dessa.
The island store was there, run by a man named Parker Mills. He ran that for, about 30 years. It's not there anymore, but at the end of Andy Rossi Lane was the Gulf View Inn. And the Gulf View Inn was a set of cottages that were set back maybe 200 yards from the Gulf. But the dining room in the Gulf View Inn is now where the Mucky Duck is. There weren't any paved roads, and there were 2 ferry boats, the Islander and the Island Queen.
Ding Darling wasn't a reality, but they talked about it a lot. They talked a lot about beach erosion. They were really worried about it. Storm water would come right up to these glass doors here. They tried everything to stop erosion. There would be dog bone groins Well, the fishing was wonderful, but it really didn't do much for the collecting of the sand.
Everybody survived with a mail boat. The Kinsey brothers would come every single day, and they'd come from over in Punta Rassa where they kept the boat.
Mr. Mackenzie was a stamp collector, as David is. And here is the last, America's last remaining mail boats, it says, from Captiva, Florida. The last day that the mail went over on a mail boat, December 9th, 1963. Postage 5 cents.
Well, I came in February '55, and this house was built the winter of '57, '58. And that bedroom there now is the same bedroom I've been in since 1958. The Mackenzies owned a lot of the land that went that way, but this land all here in the middle belonged to Alice O'Brien. And she only sold it to the people she really liked. If she liked you, you could get the property. So my mother bought 3 lots. My grandchildren are 4th generation. But there's not too many of us left that can say that. You know, it was such a completely different place then. We didn't have sand dunes out there. At the beginning, we had a lot more pine trees, a lot more mosquitoes, no telephones, dirt road. The main thing that changed the islands was when the bridge went in, the causeway. This piece of coral was my mother's. What I tried to do is put down a collection of each kind of shell that you might find on the beach, so when people come down to go shelling, they know what they're looking for. If they come in with a broken piece of something or other. Then, as I said, I do like photography. I've got this storm rolling in, which I love. Someone would say, let's do a boat picnic. So that meant that if you wanted to go, you met Andy's dock at 11 o'clock, and you didn't have to worry about what the time was. It was always at 11 o'clock. And then cocktail hour was always 6 o'clock. And then you were expected to go home at 7:30. There was no movie theater down in Sanibel, but up at South Seas, so they would get movies in every once in a while, and you'd go and you'd sit on these benches and you'd look at the movie. And that was the big excursion and the big thing you could do, because there was no other entertainment except what you made up on your own. Everybody sort of knew where everybody lived, but people made up names. Kitty O'Donoghue called her house Gopher Knoll just because she had so many turtles over there. This house is called Sanderling because my mother loved sanderlings. And the Mackenzies up there is Kittiwake because of the bird. They liked that bird. That if there'd been an emergency call for an ambulance or the fire department or the sheriff's department, they wouldn't have any idea about where to go. They couldn't go to Gumbo, Limbo, or Sanderling. So they finally had to give us all numbers. On our honeymoon, we went out fishing with a man who used to be the only guide around here, whose name was Belton Johnson. And I caught a tarpon in the mouth of the Caloosahatchee River. He was a great fisherman, and he knew the waters completely. And of course, in those days, you had to, because that was before the inland waterway and markers. There were no markers. Boca Grande Channel, surveyed 1971. Down here, you can see Blind Pass is where Bowman's Beach is. We're doing a boat picnic today. So this would be hung outside the door. And then here was the eraser, so you could erase that day's messages and start again. So this was the one that my mother had outside her door. Isn't that fun?
Oh, I used to fish a lot. That's really one of the things I most appreciated about Captiva. I used to get up in the morning early, just about dawn, and take my rod and just walk down to the beach here and fish. And of course, snook was the prime fish to catch and excellent to eat. I got my first snook just in the channel and back of the house here. I didn't think I could catch a fish that big back there. The house was built in about 1955. In those days, you could build a house on the ground. As you can see, it's not on stilts the way all the new houses are. There were no telephones when my father first came here anywhere on the island. No public water. We had a cistern on the south side of the house. My father was a horticulturist. He planted palm trees. I think we have about the highest coconut palms now. I remember when Dad planted them and they were about that high. The initial plan was that this house was to be a kind of a base for taking trips in the wintertime down to the Caribbean. Getting out here was by airplane owned by Buddy Bobst, and I asked him if he'd bring me out. We would take off from Page Field, and as the sun was setting, we landed on the Gulf. This, of course, was the cocktail time, which was quite a ritual for my parents. And I took off my shoes and rolled up my trousers and stepped out of the hatch in the bow of the airplane and waded ashore, and my father handed me a cocktail before we even shook hands, and I thought that was quite a great way to come down here.
I came into the world with a twin brother, and there were two brothers already ahead of us, so I grew up with brothers. When I was about 7 years old, I decided that I was going to live a life outdoors in nature. I like Joe wood, so every year I've been pruning it back to make it thick. I have traveled all over the United States and Canada camping, and this bird flew out from under my feet. I just love nature. This little one is a watercolor I did the first summer that the road was going through the refuge. Swimming with Maybelle, who was an intrepid sport and very, very good friend. We got to the beach, dropped our towels, dove into the water, and swam to the sandbar. We were standing there just chatting, and we were about up to our armpits in water. And I happened to look, and there I saw in front of Tween Waters this big black cloud filling the channel. And we saw that it was a huge school of tarpon escorted on both sides by 7 to 8 foot sharks. I whispered to Maybelle, "Don't move a muscle." Within seconds, the sharks were passing so close that we could have reached out and touched their dorsal fins. For several minutes, we hardly breathed in our effort to remain unnoticed. Finally, they were past, and we looked at one another as though a miracle had occurred. We were still there, intact. The seawall got put down basically underneath all this phony beach stuff. We're standing in a zone here which was the surf zone during a storm. And the waves would absolutely come in here and crash, crash, crash all winter. So finally she got desperate and she got on Paul's case, and he built a revetment for this house and the next house. Right out here, the mangroves were half the height that they now are. It was a freezing cold day. It was one of those days when winter was at its worst here. A north wind always blows the water out into the Gulf. Suddenly I heard this raucous noise coming down from the north, and I ran to the window here and looked out, and as far as I could see, north and south, was this incredible cloud of birds diving, diving, diving out of the sky and coming up with fish in their beaks, and they were diving on each other. 1,000 birds at least beating the air and hitting the water only inches apart. Brown pelicans alongside gannets and terns were diving over and over again through the bobbing white pelicans, cormorants and hingas and exuberant gulls, all screaming in the air, hurtling into the water, sometimes grazing one another on impact. It's made me so grateful for all the abundance that we live with and all that beauty and energy. Incredible.
This building was built in 1903 as a schoolhouse. The people who lived here wanted their children to learn the ABCs. Then in 1923, the Methodist Church decided to use this, they took it over actually as a church, and they had, I suppose you could call it the circuit preacher, but he came by boat when he could get here. They call it a non-denominational church. It is a Christian church. However, people from all faiths or no faiths come here. The original building is this room, and the pony stall was added, I think, in 1959, and they call it the pony stall, and somebody really thought somebody kept a pony in it, but they did not. It was a big occasion. It was the days when if you came to church in the morning, you spent the whole day. They'd have picnics, and then maybe they'd have some Bible study. The children would play. They could have church school. And many of them, remember, it would have come a long ways from the outer islands to be here when the minister was here. It's very peaceful. I frequently come up here, and there will be people just sitting on the benches outside, just quietly enjoying everything. It's great. That's the way it is on Sunday morning. We have the outsiders and the insiders. Some people always sit outside. It doesn't matter how cold it is. It can even be raining, and they'll sit out there with an umbrella. And others always sit inside. It depends upon how they get the best experience. We always sat outside when our children were little because, of course, they could play in the sand. All of our grandchildren have been baptized here. I have wonderful, well-worn, tattered Peterson that belonged to my father-in-law. One of the reasons they really loved this place was because of the birding. He knew all the bird songs so well. This one, written in his hand in 1956, has 107 birds on it. This was for April. I'd have a bird book open in every room in the house in April because April was the big bird month. The telephone, our house not having one until 1967, the end of 67. In fact, my mother-in-law made a notation about it in her little she had a diary, which is just full of wonderful things, and she has a note. We got a telephone in here. And the first raucous ring-a-ling of that phone, they picked it up, and the other end said, "This is the White House calling." Could not believe it. The post office was the hub, and everybody had to go to the post office, which in those days was right down in the corner beyond where the cemetery is. And it wasn't that you had a box. You had, everybody's was sorted by alphabet and this sort of thing. There were no house numbers, remember that too. On the way to the post office, they could leave a note at somebody's house asking them to come for dinner that night or whatever, because everybody had a little basket, a pad of paper, and a pencil hanging by the front door. And you could get an invitation, then you would go by somebody's house and put a note in their box. You couldn't call them if they weren't home, or they would organize their boating picnic that day at the post office while they're standing in line. They say, well, we're all going to meet at the Pierce Halls dock at 11 o'clock. Everybody wrote letters in those days, remember, and it's a dying art. Warren's mother wrote 4 or 5 letters a day. So every day there was mail. Not junk mail, real letters from dear friends and family.
Our parents bought Twin Palms in '76. 6 of the cottages we know goes back to the 30s. And I believe the dock goes back to the 50s. Dad gave me a call. I was working at his business back in Michigan. Hi guys. You know, asked if we want to come down and work a bit, help out. As it turned out, John and I just fell in love with the business. Being able to work at a spot where people are on vacation in a good mood, oh, it was great. I wanted it to be my regular life. Meeting people from all over the world, the stories, the laughing. We opened at 7 and back then our office was open till 9 at night, and it was a combination work and a big party. We did work hard. Dad, you know, made sure we kept a tight ship going so we can pay the bills and that. Over the years, the people we've met call just to see how you're doing or tell you a funny story. I don't know what it is about this spot, but everyone's friendly. It's a great thing. In this direction north, just up a short distance is Chadwick Bayou, which is part of South Seas, and that mangrove shoreline's excellent for redfish. And then right directly out in front of us are plenty of great grass flats for sea trout. I haven't used tools like this very recently, but regular basis I use a tool like this. It was Herb's fish, I remember now. Herb was telling folks around here it was a 200-pound fish. And Bob says, no way, that's 140 pound. Bob kind of turned his head and Herb had a garden hose. He was kind of rinsing off the fish. But when Bob turned his head, Herb starts filling the fish up from the mouth with water because he knew he was stretching how big the fish was. And he was trying to goose it up because they went on to weigh it. and Herb was off a little bit. When I go on vacation from here, and I'm coming across that causeway, the next morning when I get on my bicycle and ride to work, it's the highest high I've ever had. It's special. I know it by that feeling. Hand me stuff and let me help you, whatever.
Oh, I'm not sure I can.
There is a magic here, and you are here because you're special too. I can't explain why you would be able to be one of the lucky ones. But the person standing next to you on Captiva is also a very lucky person, and there is a reason for it. I know it's happened all through the past history, and I know it'll be happening 3 generations from now.
Captiva's history still continues to be lived, to be remembered, and to be told. It lives in the sun, the sea, and has created a people with shoes so full of sand that future generations might never shake it out.